Wow, what a way to kick off 2026. Our breaking story today is about flirting with disaster. What the Trump administration, specifically the Department of Homeland Security, did on New Year's Eve, it's absolutely shocking. Welcome to Occupy Democrats, and hit that subscribe button if you want all the news that's fit to post in 2026.
Investigating whether some of the cuts to the federal government left key vacancies at the National Weather Service or in the emergency coordination.
No, they did not. They did. I'll tell you, if you look at that, what a situation that all is, and that was really the Biden setup. That was not our setup, but I wouldn't blame Biden for it either. I would just say this is a 100-year catastrophe, and it's just so horrible to watch.
Horrible to watch indeed. Well, in our breaking story today, it actually is about horrible things being done at FEMA on New Year's Eve that could leave millions vulnerable to horrible things like this. Now, before we get to what's being called the New Year's Eve massacre at FEMA, let's catch up on how we got here with the experts at PBS while we still can.
President Trump has signaled in the past that major changes would be coming to FEMA after this hurricane season. But last month, he had praise for FEMA's work after the deadly July 4th flooding in Texas, saying his administration had, quote, fixed it up in no time. Even so, the Trump administration is attempting to reallocate some $4 billion in funds meant to help local communities protect against natural disasters, a move a federal judge blocked this week. So what has the turmoil at FEMA meant for people affected by natural disasters? Sarah Labowitz, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, has been looking into just that. Sarah, thanks for joining us. So I understand you and your team track how much federal spending is going to disaster recovery. What does the data tell us about disaster response under this Trump administration? And what stands out to you when compared to previous administrations?
Well, one thing that's really standing out to me is how long it's taking to approve disaster declaration requests. When a disaster hits, a governor typically makes a request to the federal government for help. And what we're seeing is that those requests are really stacking up so that FEMA help is getting to places much slower than it was under the previous administration and even under the first President Trump administration. The other thing that we're seeing is that the administration is no longer approving requests for mitigation funding. And that's the funding that jurisdictions use to anticipate the next disaster to make themselves more resilient for the future. And that funding has really dried up.
I know that the Trump administration has attempted to sort of consolidate decision-making at FEMA. Is that behind this backlog in requests for help from governors?
I don't know what's causing the backlog. What we do see in the data is that there's a bunching effect, so that when a disaster happens, it sort of joins a queue, and the queue gets longer and longer as time goes on, and then the administration is approving those requests in a big batch. And there's some real downsides to that. One of the benefits of FEMA is that it's got a nationwide disaster force that can deploy, and it makes sense to deploy those resources along with the pace as disasters happen. And when you wait to approve them all at once, that means that those forces have to deploy all together to a large number of places. So there's some real downsides to the way the administration is bunching these requests.
Okay, here's our top story today, as reported earlier by CNN. DHS begins slashing FEMA disaster response staff as 2026 begins. The Trump administration is abruptly cutting dozens of staff who are at the forefront of disaster response and recovery at the Federal Emergency Management Agency this week, according to internal emails obtained by CNN and sources familiar with the plan. On New Year's Eve, some employees received emails saying their positions would no longer be renewed and, therefore, your services will no longer be needed after their contracts expire in the first days of January. The cuts target FEMA's cadre of on-call response and recovery core teams, which form the backbone of the agency's operation during and after a disaster, and could be just the beginning of a larger effort by Secretary Kristi Noem and the Department of Homeland Security to shrink FEMA, potentially axing thousands of workers in the coming months who deploy during hurricanes, wildfires, and other national emergencies. According to two sources with knowledge of the terminations, which suddenly ousted roughly 50 core staff, the decision came from FEMA's new acting chief, Karen Evans, who was elevated to the role by DHS leadership after the embattled previous agency head resigned. The notice has stunned employees who learned they would be let go within days. Beyond cruel to be treated in such a way, one of the workers said, FEMA's core employees are among the first federal boots on the ground during a disaster, working shoulder to shoulder with local officials, helping survivors, and managing the crucial aid and grants that fuel recovery and rebuilding. FEMA can't do disaster response and recovery without core employees. Former senior FEMA official told CNN, the regional offices are almost entirely core staff, so the first FEMA people who are usually on site won't be there. The impact is states are on their own. So far, DHS, which oversees FEMA, hasn't given the agency much guidance with what comes next, leaving employees anxious about more cuts. Inside FEMA and across the country, officials are sounding the alarm about the administration's plan, warning that most states simply aren't equipped to handle major disasters on their own. The FEMA Review Council is expected to recommend moving some agency staff out of Washington, D.C. and into other parts of the country, a move that could help fill some gaps if the core workforce is slashed. Still, it likely means fewer federal boots on the ground when disaster strikes, leaving states with more responsibility for supporting survivors and navigating access to the federal resources that are still available, a bureaucratic process the Trump administration has vowed to improve. If cruelty and pain is the plan, then we need to stay extra vigilant and committed more than ever. Now, to that end, let's close on a positive but cautionary note that many people may have missed along the way, and there's a great rescue dog in there.